In my opinion, the religion, the church, during different military conflicts, during the wars, has to call for peace, has to condemn the aggression against other country. However, the Russian Orthodox Church did not do this. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, he said that this war is metaphysical, that it was provoked by the other forces outside of Russia, kind of repeating the takes, the thesis of Russian Kremlin propaganda. Patriarch Kirill, who is being a part of Russian elites, oligarchs, and the rest of bishops, the rest of priests, they pray for the Russian army, they pray for the president, they collect money for the Russian army, and they collect everything so Russian army would win in Ukraine.
How did the Russian Orthodox Church become a part of Putin's regime? Why does the Church send priests to the battlefront? Does Putin believe in God, and is he truly an Orthodox Christian, as the Russian TV has been trying to portray him? About all this and more in this video.
Well, church used to be always part of the Russian state.
Well, even during the times of the Russian Empire, church used to be a full-fledged part of the state, since it was exactly religion, as in all other absolute monarchies, that legitimized the rule of the Romanov family. The Romanovs were sent by God to rule over Russia. This is what the church reaffirmed to the ordinary people. For doing that, the church received a lot of benefits. For example, the government gave much land to the clergymen and monasteries at which they could conduct business activity. Researcher Lubinitsky claims that the Orthodox Church of the Russian Empire owned about 10,000 square kilometers of land, which is about 2.5 million acres. Moreover, the church even had its own peasants who paid tribute to it until the middle of the 18th century. The state and religion existed mutually beneficial. The Orthodox Church legitimized the rule of the Romanov family, and the government gave them the benefits of land tax exemption. In 1917, the Communist Revolution happened in the Russian Empire. The Orthodox Church did not support communists, and during the Civil War from 1917 to 1922, the Church supported the enemy of the communists, White Army, that was trying to restore the rule of the God's anointed Romanovs.
For this, communists were really offended on the church, and this is why Lenin then said,
"We must combat religion. That is the ABC of all materialism, and consequently of Marxism. But Marxism is not a materialism which has stopped at the ABC. Marxism goes further. It says we must know how to combat religion."
On the February 23, 1922, the All-Russian Executive Committee released a decree on seizure of all church jewelry.
From this document, the official persecution against the church started. Temples were looted and destroyed, and clerics were repressed. Millions of the Orthodox believers, including clergy and laity, were shot, put in prison, or deported. Only in 1918 and 1919, for defending the church and religion, in general about 11,000 priests and ordinary people were repressed. 9,000 of them were killed. Thousands of monks were cruelly tortured. A lot of temples were either destroyed or closed. Huge amount of icons and religion books were burned. Until 1931, the clergy by law did not have suffrage. Well, to be honest, they didn't lose much, considering the fact that all the elections in the USSR were fake anyway.
To understand the level of oppression on religion, we just need to compare two numbers: the amount of churches before the communists came to power in 1917 and after.
In 1914, on the territory of the Russian Empire, the number of the Orthodox churches was 55,199. However, in the year of 1987, only 6,908 remained in the USSR. This is 8 times less than before communists came to power. In 1931, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior was destroyed. It was the biggest Orthodox cathedral of the USSR in those years. As a replacement, communists planned to build the tallest building in the world, Palace of the Soviets, on top of which a 100 meters tall statue of Vladimir Lenin would be shining. However, the building was not finished due to the Second World War. The pit from the destroyed Cathedral of Christ the Savior, which was dug for the basement, turned into the biggest open-air water pool in the USSR. The cathedral was only rebuilt in 1999.
At the times of the USSR, the relationship between the state and the religion was different from time to time. At first, it was strictly prohibited, but then, at the very hardest moment for the country, during the Second World War, Stalin allowed it, but only under the strictly control of the government.
During World War II, Stalin had to treat the churches more favorably to inspire ordinary people, workers, and ex-peasants who were extremely religious but kept it as a secret to join the Red Army and fight Nazis. There is a legend that at the start of December 1941, when Nazis sieged Moscow, by the order of Stalin, the air procession with the icon of Mary, Mother of Jesus, happened. A plane with the icon of Mary, Mother of Jesus, flew over surrounded Moscow, and according to the legend, this is why Moscow was not taken by the Nazis. During World War II and the rest of the rule of Stalin, till his death in 1953, the attitude toward the church was slightly better. However, Khrushchev came to power after Stalin and started the oppression of religion again. All religions were controlled by secret services and higher-ranking priests were made accountable to the KGB.
Only in 1990 the church got its freedom, 1 year before the collapse of the USSR. In 1993, in the newly created Russian Federation Constitution, in Article number 14, they were saying that Russian Federation is a secular state.
It means that no religion can be set as a governmental or mandatory. Religious associations are separated from the state and equal before the law. However, nowadays the Russian Orthodox Church has fused with the state. It not only serves the interests of Putin's elites, but also became a part of the government, which is contrary to the Russian constitution.
I remember when I was in 10th grade, I was 16, and every male teenager at this age had to go through military training for a couple of weeks. And when we've been to that military base, I remember I was paying attention to how everything is structured. And that time I was really into law and I was learning about Russian constitution. And as it says in constitution, Russia is a secular state. So I've decided to ask about religion in the army. How's it going there in that military base? It was in the city of Birobidzhan, Jewish Autonomous Oblast, in the far east of Russia. And so I've asked, what kind of religion buildings do you have in the base? And they've said that they only have a small church, Orthodox church in this camp, and this is the only option, if you're religious, to go and pray to the God. And eventually I asked, well, if Russia is a secular state, why do you even have religious buildings, religion structures inside of the military camp? And even if you do have it, why do you have only Orthodox church? Why not, a Muslim mosque or a synagogue? Why no other else? Because we are a secular state, everyone has a right to, be a part of different religion. And I just got laughed at the face for asking this question, because everyone in Russia understands that the Orthodox Church is being a part of the government.
Today in Russia, the church is in fact part of the state, because the Russian Orthodox Church would never criticize the authorities. They always say what the government wants to hear from them, since Putin chose the church as his ideology, because he just doesn't have any other ideology or national idea. And if a dictator wants to stay in power as long as possible, the ideology is mandatory. Communist ideology is not a good fit anymore. Socialism goes against all the hundreds of millions of dollars spent on mansions and yachts in Russia and abroad, which are owned by all his oligarch friends. Since the Russian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchy is a part of the state, the head of the church, Patriarch Kirill, does not tolerate any kind of criticism, because it not only offends him, but Putin. This is why in summer 2013, a new article number 148 of the Penal Code was created. It says violations of the right to freedom of conscience and denominations, which means punishing all public actions committed aiming to offend the feelings of believers. This article was created after a well-known performance by Pussy Riot, a so-called punk praise service which took place in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow in 2012. One of the lyrics was saying, "Mother of God, drive Putin away." All participants of the performance were given 2 years in prison for hooliganism. However, since police could not figure out what article should be implemented to punish Pussy Riot members, in 2013 the article number 148 about violations of the right of freedom of conscience and denominations was created. This article was made to fight any kind of oppositionary performances which would use religious organizations as a tribune. Nevertheless, not only political activists became victims of this article. For instance, in 2017 2016, a blogger from YouTube, Ruslan Sokolovsky, was punished for catching Pokemons with the Pokemon Go smartphone game inside of a church. He was given 3.5 years of probation for just catching Pokemons with a smartphone. Or another case of a blogger Ruslan Babiev and his friend Anastasia Chistova, who in 2021 were sentenced to 10 months of jail for provoking photos made in the background of St. Basil Cathedral on the Red Square. Another case of a tattoo blogger Polina Morogun, who took a nude photo in the background of a church. The court of Moscow sent her to compulsory treatment in psychiatric hospital, which was the favorite method of the KGB to oppress the dissidents in the late USSR. And all those cases happened just because the criticism of the church in Russia is equal to criticism of authority.
On the official website of Moscow Patriarchy, there is a document which is called The Basics of Social Concept of Russian Orthodox Church, where it says,
the church cannot provide assistance to the state if an aggressive foreign policy is being pursued. The church also opposes propaganda of foreign violence, as well as various manifestations of hatred that can provoke fratricidal clashes.
And right now, let's see what's the official position of Russian Orthodox Church on the Russian war against Ukraine. At the very first days, the Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, he was calling for peace. And he was calling to do everything what's needed to avoid casualties among civilians.
However, already 27th of February, Patriarch Kirill said this.
Не дай Бог, чтобы нынешняя политическая ситуация в близкой нам братской Украине была направлена на то, чтобы злые силы, которые всегда боролись с единством Руси и Русской Церкви, одержали верх.
By saying this, Patriarch Kirill repeated one of the takes of the Russian propaganda that Ukraine is a part of the Russian world and not an independent country.
Later, on the 6th of March, Patriarch Kirill, on the Sunday service, speaking about the war in Ukraine, he started to repeat Kremlin takes on the war. For example, he said,
8 лет идут попытки уничтожить то, что существует на Донбассе. А на Донбассе существует неприятие, принципиальное неприятие так называемых ценностей, которые сегодня предлагаются теми, кто претендует на мировую власть. Сегодня есть такой тест на лояльность этой власти. Некий пропуск в тот счастливый мир, мир избыточного потребления, мир видимой свободы. А знаете, что это за тест? Тест очень простой и одновременно ужасный. Это гей-парад. Вот эти требования ко многим провести гей-парад и являются тестом на лояльность к тому самому могущественному миру. И мы знаем, что если люди или страны отвергают эти требования, то они не входят в тот мир, они становятся чужими.
Kirill says,
Все сказанное свидетельствует о том, что мы вступили в борьбу, которая имеет не физическое, а метафизическое значение.
or for example, in this video, Patriarch Kirill shows his highest level of not knowing the Russian history, or maybe the highest level of hypocrisy and lies.
Мы ни с кем не хотим воевать. Россия никогда ни на кого не нападала. Это удивительно, когда великая и могучая страна никогда ни на кого не нападала. Она только защищала свои рубежи.
You're listening to all of this, and I guess you're asking yourself a question. Who is this Patriarch Kirill? What's his biography? Well, actually, his real name is Vladimir Mikhailovich Gundyaev, not Kirill. And I guess you're asking the question, why is he repeating the Kremlin propaganda? Well, let's find out.
The biography of Patriarch Kirill is covered with fog, which is why there are many rumors about it. Some people really think that Patriarch Kirill is an ex-crime boss from the 90s whose nickname was Yaponchik, which means little Japanese. If this version seems unconvincing to you, then here is a photo comparison that will make you to think about it for at least a couple of seconds. Moreover, the fact that the crime boss Yaponchik died in 2009, at the same year when Kirill became a patriarch after a mysterious death of the previous patriarch Alexei II, who died after falling and hitting the back of his head over rim of a toilet, which at the present time is very reminiscent of all the accidental quotes death of top managers of Russian companies. All these coincidences do not leave one indifferent to the idea that Patriarch Kirill is an ex-mafia boss. However, the theory doesn't have any proofs and can be put to the category of conspirology.
It's harder to put another theory in this folder of conspiracies, that Patriarch Kirill is actually an ex-KGB agent.
When it comes to Kirill's real biography, we know that in the 1970s he was a representative of the Moscow Patriarchate to the World Council of Churches in Geneva. In those days, it was simply impossible to imagine that the ideological enemy of the Communist Party, a priest, could easily leave the USSR, especially for an official event, and not being recruited by the KGB. The USSR controlled and recruited all high-ranking religious figures. Many people have been saying this for a long time. For example, former KGB general Oleg Danilovich Kalugin said that Kirill was a KGB agent. In an interview in 2012, he said,
Значит, Кирилл, нынешний, сегодняшний приятель, мой бывший тоже, значит, мы с ним знакомы еще с малых лет. То есть он, когда кончал духовную академию, я с ним познакомился. А я тогда, был, у меня такой интерес был к церкви. Ну, абсолютно не связан с профессиональным, просто для общего образования. Кирилл – это старый наш друг, я имею в виду гебевский друг.
А и, старый друг лучше новых двух.
Кстати, у него хорошие отношения с руководством нынешним российским.
Another former KGB officer, Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Popov, confirmed Kalugin's words. But the fact that Patriarch Kirill used to work for the KGB became 100% confirmed after an investigation conducted by journalists of Swiss newspapers Tages Anzeiger and Le Matin Dimanche. According to their investigations, Kirill's tasks as a KGB agent included collecting information on the members of the World Council of Churches and limiting criticism of the USSR for oppressing religious freedoms. The Swiss police records were the starting point for the investigation. Their archives included a file on Vladimir Gundyaev about his ties to the KGB. Knowing these facts of Patriarch Kirill's biography, the following news doesn't seem so absurd anymore. On July 1st, 2023, the Patriarch laid flowers at the memorial to fallen FSB officers in Kaliningrad. The FSB, by the way, is the direct heir of the KGB. After work trips to Zurich in the 70s being undercover as a priest, KGB agent Vladimir Gundyaev traveled the world, worked inside the USSR, and it wasn't until 2009 that he became Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church.
It's also a commonly known fact that Patriarch Kirill is the richest hierarch in the world.
Back in 2006, journalists counted about $4 billion in Vladimir Gundyaev's assets. It's hard to imagine what Kirill's fortune is today.
I guess you are interested how Patriarch Kirill, who was supposed to live a really modest life, not becoming one of the Russian oligarchs, how did he make so much money?
It is known that in 1993, 2 years after the collapse of the USSR, the financial trading company Nika appeared with the participation of the Moscow Patriarchy. Patriarch Kirill's company was importing cigarettes to Russia from abroad.
In 4 years, this company imported something about 8 billion of cigarettes. And what's more important, didn't pay taxes from any of them. Why? Because church is exempt from taxes.
Patriarch Kirill was also involved in exporting oil in the 90s. Later, Gundyaev tried to enter the Russian seafood market. The government granted his company a permit to catch the delicacy of Kamchatka crabs and shrimp. In addition, several journalistic investigations have concluded that the Russian Orthodox Church is actually a corporation where each cathedral or temple are registered as a separate non-profit organization. And what does it mean? That simply means that they do not pay taxes. From 10 to 50% of their income, parishes, of which the Russian Orthodox Church has more than 30,000 throughout Russia, give to the eparchy. The eparchy accumulates the tribute, and then 15% of the amount is given to the Patriarchate, basically to Kirill. Only about 1 billion of rubles annually comes from Moscow parishes to the very top. Kirill's budget is also supplemented by commercial enterprises, for example the Danilovsky Hotel in Moscow and the Sofrina plant in the Moscow region, where icons, furniture, coffins, candles are produced, providing half of the Russian churches. In the dioceses, they strongly recommend buying Sofrina products and not other manufacturers to ensure orders for the Patriarch's company. Jewelry, renting out conference rooms, agriculture, and the market for funeral services are also within the church sphere of interests.
All of this helped Patriarch Kirill to make a really great fortune, which was estimated at 2004 for about $1.5 billion. And then, 2 years later, journalists actually counted $4 billion.
In real estate, Kirill owns 3 apartments, 2 in Moscow with a total value of 82 millions of rubles, and 1 in St. Petersburg with a value of 9 millions of rubles. And when counted together with Kirill's relatives, the summary of their real estate was estimated by investigative journalists at 225 millions of rubles, which is more than $2.5 million, which is a huge amount of money for Russia.
Even though Patriarch Kirill has a lot of elite apartments, he doesn't have a necessity to live in them.
After all, he has many residencies, the maintenance of which is the responsibility of the state budget, or in other words, Russian taxpayers. These residencies are furnished with the most expensive furniture, as we know the Patriarch prefers the Italian, and some of the facilities are guarded by the Federal Protective Service, whose duties include guarding the president. The Patriarch also has a luxurious car fleet, 2 Cadillac Escalades, a G-Wagon, a Lincoln armored SUV, and a Mercedes-Benz limousine worth of 40 millions of rubles. By the way, there is a funny moment associated with this Mercedes when Kirill's security guard falls across on top of Kirill's head to avoid scratching the interior roof of the car.
As Patriarch Kirill was serving the interests of godless people in the USSR, continued to do this in the 90s for the businessmen of the 90s, then he continued to do this for the Putin and Kremlin's elites. And of course, he wouldn't be able to make such a great fortune without serving for Putin.
On February 24, 2022, when Putin began a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the essence of Patriarch Kirill fully manifested itself. He began methodically whitewashing Russia and justifying the war. The Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate began a spiritual war against Ukraine.
Not only Patriarch Kirill called this war inevitable and metaphysical, he also said a lot of things that supposedly, by the opinion of believers, has to help Russia to win this war and to bring people around the figure of the president.
On March 13, 2022, Kirill gave an icon of the August Mother of God to Viktor Zolotov, a former Putin security guard who was used to carrying his suitcase back in the 90s and who is nowadays the head of Rosguardia, an agency created to fight protesters and who actively participated in the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Large units of Rosguardia traveled in a convoy towards Kiev to fight protesters after the city was supposed to be seized by the Russian military forces. However, the convoy was completely defeated near Kiev in the very first days of the war.
And exactly to these war criminals, the head of the Russian Church gave the icon with the words.
Этот образ я бы хотел передать для нашего воинского храма. Пусть он вдохновляет молодых воинов, которые принимают присягу, которые вступают на путь защиты Отечества. Вручаю вам. Ну и поскольку вы возглавляете Росгвардию, то я хотел бы, чтобы этот образ именно был в рядах Росгвардии Российской Федерации.
Ваше Святейшество, благодарю вас за этот дар. Хочу пожелать вам многие лета во славу трудов ваших. И хочу довести до вас и до всех присутствующих здесь прихожан о том, что войска Национальной гвардии совместно с вооруженными силами Российской Федерации выполняют все поставленные задачи. Хочу сказать, что да, не все идет так быстро, как хотелось бы, но да, это только лишь потому, что нацисты прячутся за спинами мирных граждан, за спинами стариков, женщин, детей, устраивают огневые позиции в детских садах, школах, в жилых домах. Но мы идем к намеченной цели шаг за шагом, и победа будет за нами. А эта икона будет защищать русское воинство и ускорять нашу победу. Еще раз благодарю вас за это.
On March 16, 2022, Pope Francis from Rome spoke with the Patriarch Kirill in the hope of influencing Putin through Kirill and stopping the war against Ukraine. In response, he listened to a 20-minute lecture from Kirill on the reasons for the invasion. Pope Francis asked Kirill not to get to the level of a Putin's altar server.
With even more cannibalistic statements, Patriarch Kirill came up during the September mobilization inside of Russia.
On September 23rd, during the service related to mobilization, Kirill said,
Этого храма обращается ко всем военнослужащим. Христос воскрес! и все вместе с Ним воскреснем. И жизнь вечна, а потому идите смело исполнять свой воинский долг. И помните, что если вы жизнь свою положили за Родину, за други своя, как говорит Священное Писание, то вы будете вместе с Богом в Его царстве, в Его славе, в Его вечной жизни.
Also, 25th of February, Kirill said that killing in the name of the motherland is not a sin.
Мы знаем, что сегодня многие погибают на полях междоусобной брани. Церковь молится о том, чтобы брань сия закончилась как можно быстрее, чтобы как можно меньше братьев убили друг друга в этой братоубийственной войне. И одновременно церковь осознает, что если кто-то, движимый чувством долга, необходимостью исполнить свою присягу, остается верным своему призванию и идет исполнять то, что его долг ему велит, и если в исполнении этого долга человек погибает, то он, несомненно, совершает деяние, равносильное жертве. Он себя приносит в жертву за других. И потому верим, что эта жертва смывает все грехи, которые человек совершил.
So the Patriarch is saying that if a soldier sacrificed himself in war, he will wash away his sins in this way. During the first 2 weeks of mobilization, priests appeared at draft centers voluntarily or at the invitation of the military, but it was not officially made by the church. However, on October 6, the practice was legalized. The Patriarch Kirill issued a directive for bishops in their cities and villages to organize pastoral care for mobilized soldiers in cooperation with regional leaders of the Russian Federation and military commissariats and mobilization centers. In every service, Patriarch Kirill refers to Russians and Ukrainians as one nation, repeating one of the many takes of the Russian propaganda that Ukrainians are Russians who forgot that.
Судьбоносное время, потому что многие восстают на Русь. И у многих голова закрушилась в желании погубить Русь, ее самобытность, ее независимость, ее свободу. И потому мы должны сегодня особенно укрепить себя в вере, наполнить наши храмы, молиться за властей, за воинств, за своих родных, близких, молиться за церковь православную, которая в этих тяжелейших условиях сохраняет духовное единство Святой Руси. Еще раз хочу сказать, мы дожили с вами до судьбоносного времени.
On 19th of January 2023, in a Bogoyavlensky church inside of Moscow, he said during the christening this.
Мы молимся Господу, чтобы Он вразумил тех безумцев и помог им понять, что всякое желание уничтожить Россию будет означать конец мира. Но мы верим, что Господь не оставит землю русскую, не оставит наших властей, президента нашего православного, воинство наше.
20th of January, Patriarch Kirill also said this.
Look for opportunities. Collect money. Send packages if possible. Go there yourself. Support the military. I know that a lot is already being done, but I think it is still not enough. And in the media space, they don't often talk about the help of the Russian Orthodox Church to those who are in Donetsk, Luhansk, on the front line.
Patriarch Kirill even called for armistice on 7th of January, which is an Orthodox Christmas.
After only 6 hours, Putin signed a decree for Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu to cease fire from 12 o'clock on January 6th until midnight on January 7th. The addressee of this message is likely the Western public and politicians who need to be convinced of the humanity of the Russian leadership and the untrustworthiness of the Ukrainian government. Perhaps political technologists appeal to the cultural code, the beloved in Europe story of the touching Christmas truce between the Germans and English during the First World War.
Patriarch Kirill is known for criticizing the government and its relation towards the religion in the 20th century during the Soviet regime. However, in his criticism, he never mentioned the words чекисты, which is a word for agents of KGBs. He never uses KGB itself, and also he never uses the word Soviet regime. Well, you know what? You know why? Because he doesn't want to offend the current president, Putin, who is an ex-KGB agent.
Apparently, Patriarch Kirill has forgotten who the real leader in Christianity is. And in his service on January 8th, the Patriarch said that in Ukraine, the same madness is happening as in Russia after the Communist Revolution.
Patriarch Kirill totally identifies himself as part of the Kremlin regime. This is why he's gonna say anything to please Putin.
It is thanks to the support of the state, exemption from taxes, and the use of the tax money that the Patriarch of all Russia in Moscow, Kirill, exists.
And I'd be happy to say that Patriarch Kirill is the only one Orthodox priest who is actually discrediting the Russian Orthodox Church. However, it is not like this.
A huge number of priests from all over Russia are raising money for the Russian army, praying for the success on the front, serving with the military brigades in occupied territories, and even participating in military operations themselves.
The church holds different events to fundraise money for the soldiers.
For example, the fair Everything for Victory took place at St. Nicholas Cathedral in Kislovodsk, where school children and their parents sold baked goods. Blessing the fair, the head of the cathedral and the director of the Orthodox Gymnasium, Father Ian Znaminsky, noted the necessity and importance of the charitable event, which will be a small contribution to the common cause, supporting our soldiers and children of Donbass. In the village of Stanitsa Severskaya in Kubань, female members of the Church of Saint Spiridon Trimofinsky knitted socks and sewed patchwork blankets for the soldiers. Employees of the Troitsky parish in the Tatarstan village of Chistopolsky Vyselki make burjuki stoves for soldiers which can be used to warm up food and dry clothes. And the members of the Church of Saint Panteleimon in Kirov, joining the volunteer movement Golden Hands of an Angel, make camouflage nets for the Russian soldiers. Eparchies hold holidays for the children of mobilized soldiers, collect aid, and send volunteers as medical personnel to occupied territories. Children from Sunday schools write letters to the front in large numbers.
Archpriest Andrei Tkachov, during one of the sessions of the lower bracket of the Russian parliament, Gosduma, he said that the Russian soldier is dying for the biblical mindset, which stands for large families and also moral.
И за что воевать солдату, за что ему кровь проливать, за что превращаться в калеку, за что оставаться на поле боя недвижимым? За какой образ будущего воевать должен человек? За какой образ будущего человеку не страшно умереть? Именно за тот библейский тип мышления, за крепкую семью, за многодетные семьи, значит, за нравственность христианскую.
Archpriest Andrei Tkachov served in the Kiev-Pechorsk Lavra in Ukraine until 2004, but then moved to Russia. Since the beginning of the full-scale war against Ukraine, he has become famous for his cannibalistic statements supporting the war. For example, in this video he explains how to properly load shells into the Russian rocket launch system Grad, praying for each shell.
Без молитвы пакет градов не снаряжай. Каждую эту, значит, сигару засовываешь, как бы, Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй. И так далее, и так далее, и так далее. Такое, значит, такое. И потом, ух.
Andrei Tkachov also said that the soldier's death is the best death.
Воинская смерть лучше всех смертей. Это лучшая смерть из смертей. Люди умирают, как свиньи, захлебываются блевотиной, скажу я вам. Еле-еле пили, перепили, под столы попадали, как бы, знаешь, обрыгались, как бы, и блевотиной захлебнулись. Вот тебе и смерть. А потом малолетки-зацеперы там поехали там зацепиться за электричку, там покататься, его током шваркнул на 3000 вольт, как бы, и он обугленный на рельсы упал, а ему лет было 17. Пошли фотку сделать, селфи какую-нибудь на крышу дома. Подскользнулись и полетели с 15-го этажа вместе с телефоном. Сделали селфи. Таких дурацких смертей, Так лучше с оружием в руках умереть за родину. Как герой, как мужчина. Еще помолиться перед смертью, сказать, Господи помилуй, и пошел.
Archpriest Andrei Tkachov also forbade Russian women to spend money on self-care. He said the said money must be sent to the front.
За ваши попы, желающие в мягком кресле лететь на Гоа, сегодня умирают лучшие русские пацаны. Лучшие русские пацаны. Но как можно меньше тратьте на себя. На ногти свои тратьте меньше. На волосню свою тратьте меньше. На то, чтобы мазать себя там разными кремами, тратьте меньше. На всякие солярии и массажи тратьте меньше. Вообще не тратьте на это. Вообще пусть они все плачут. Вся эта индустрия обслуживания смертного телесея. Пусть плачут сегодня, потому что нужно тратить на них ноль. Все остальное бедным и на фронт.
At the same time, Father Vladimir from Berdsk is calling to pray for our soldiers every day.
Дорогие братья и сестры, всех вас призываем, мои родные, к молитве совместно за наших родных, бойцов, солдатиков, защитников нашего Отечества. Совместная молитва – это огромная сила, огромная помощь, огромный щит и защита будет для наших бойцов.
Priests participate in the combat, and they are being at the special military operation. And you may ask, what do they do there? What the priests can do at war? Well, they pray for the soldiers, they baptize soldiers, and sometimes it gets to the pretty absurd degree.
In October 2022, Archpriest Viktor Ivanov from Ufa arrived at the front and baptized Russian soldiers right in the forest. The absurdity lies in the fact that the priest used black body bags for dead soldiers as containers for holy water. The archpriest himself saw a certain symbolism in this. He said, in baptism, a person dies to sin, and they were baptized in funeral packages. A new person is born, a warrior of Christ.
Priests not only pray, but also go into charges with the soldiers. And this is actually one of the obligations of chaplains in the army.
Chaplains have been officially working in the Russian army since 2010 in the position of assistants to commanders of military units for working with religious military personnel. Like other members of the Russian armed forces, they receive a salary from the state.
Priests not only fight unofficially, but sometimes also unofficially. For example, here is a video of one of such soldiers, priests, shooting an RPG towards Ukrainians.
Давай. Московская духовная академия семинария сражается с НАТО. Христос воскресе. Стреляй.
Later, it turned out that the person's name in this video is Pavel Kunitsyn, who has been banned from serving as a priest by the Murmansk eparchy since 2016. However, even after the media drew attention to Pavel after this video shooting RPG, he was not defrocked from his saint rank. This is somewhat, but encouraging his actions by the church.
From the official information, we know at least about 5 dead priests who were officially the priests of the Russian Orthodox Church, and it's only officially.
Father Mikhail Vasilyev, posthumously awarded by Putin, was the priest of the cathedral at the headquarters of Strategic Missile Forces. He passed away on November 6, 2022. Anatoly Grigoriev, the abbot of the Bogyavlensky temple in the village of Isakovo in Zelenodolsky district of the Republic of Tatarstan, passed away on September 9, 2022. Archpriest Yefrem Kozlovtsev was a chaplain of the Composite Kazakh Brigade, Don. He died on September 25, 2022. Priest Alexander Tsiganov was a military chaplain of the 76th Airborne Assault Division of the Russian Airborne Troops. President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Putin posthumously awarded him the title of Hero of Russia. He died on November 21, 2022. Archpriest Oleg Artemov of Novaya Ladoga died on March 24, 2023.
Usually, there are from 15 up to 25 priests at the territory of the special military operation, which is a war, and there is always a rotation between them, as in the usual army. Patriarch Kirill doesn't forget the achievements of his servicemen, and that's why he is asking to give the same social guarantees to the priests at war as to the usual soldiers.
Patriarch Kirill said that clergymen are often on the front lines and do not hide even though they are not protected. A priest with a cross goes forward when the fighters attack. Snipers primarily target priests. They are the most desirable target of the enemy.
While Russian Orthodox Church fiercely supports the war against Ukraine, other Catholic churches inside of Russia don't. And this is why the deputy of the Russian parliament member, the member of the party Just Russia, Справедливая Россия, Mikhail Delyagin, he asked and offered to ban Catholic Church inside of Russia.
В букве закона после этих слов католическая церковь на территории Российской Федерации должна быть запрещена, имущество должно быть конфисковано, как организация, существование которой на территории России несовместимо с существованием России. Потому что ведь Ватикан как государство, он был создан фашистами.
И переговоры с ними вел Муссолини, да, и он подписывал Латеранские соглашения, да.
Но именно Бенито Муссолини, как фашист, создал государство Ватикан. Государство Ватикан и Папа Римский платили за это верой и правдой. Они окормляли фашистов во время Второй мировой войны. Они не просто поддерживали Гитлера, пока он был силен. Да? Когда фашизм был разгроблен, именно католики, именно Ватикан спасали фашистов. Причем не каких там рядовых запутавшихся юнцов. Так спасали Менгеля, вывезли люди Ватикана, Эйхмана вывезли люди Ватикана, организаторов чудовищного геноцида сербов, усташей, вывозили люди Ватикана, там в основном, правда, польской национальности, и так далее.
In addition, in Russia the Orthodox Church has a monopoly on religion, which is supported by the state in contradiction to the constitution. For example, many independent church denominations that are not affiliated with Orthodoxy are simply banned in Russia and their supporters are sent to prison. Jehovah's Witnesses are considered a sect in Russia and all of their congregations are closed. The Supreme Court of the Russian Federation in 2017 recognized their activities as extremist and banned them in Russia. As of January 2023, about 367 people have been imprisoned, and the total number of those persecuted is at least 600 people.
3rd of May, there was an attack of drones on Kremlin. A Russian Orthodox Church made an offer to make this icon of Serafim Sarovsky, of the Saint Serafim Sarovsky, flying on a plane around the territories which are in danger zone of the drones flying from Ukraine. So this is their solution to protect the motherland.
On the plane of Rosgvardia and carried by the priest Roman Bagdasarov. In 1904, Emperor Nicholas II blessed soldiers leaving for the Russo-Japanese War with this icon. This war was soon lost by Russia. I think there is some kind of definite symbolism in this. What do you think? Leave your opinion in the comments below.
The whole subculture of that orthodoxy was formed.
Television, internet, processions with St. George ribbons while singing Katyusha, Orthodox support for the war has been formulated into specific content. The biggest example of the orthodoxy is the TV channel Spas, the main Orthodox channel in the country. This channel broadcasts videos related to Orthodoxy. Since September 25, 2013, the TV channel Spas has been included in the package of mandatory free-to-air channels throughout the territory of the Russian Federation and belongs to the Russian Orthodox Church. Spas TV channel produced a propaganda series about the war called War and Bible, in which they try to justify the war against Ukraine with the Bible. Throughout 10 episodes, they try to formulate a theology of war regarding the Russian invasion of Ukraine, using the book called Bible and War by Serbian bishop of the 20th century Nikolai Velimirovich. It is difficult to apply a book from 1932 to modern realities, especially considering that the author praised Hitler 3 years after writing it, then later was sent to the Dachau concentration camp and became one of the main symbolic figures of Serbian nationalism.
Мы будем стрелять, мы будем давить, друг друга терять и хоронить. Мы будем рубить, уничтожать, судить и казнить и побеждать.
Since, at the end of the third series, here among Dionysy Osipov, chaplain of the reservist unit 1117 Rus. In addition, the war correspondent from Spas brought ammunition, body armor, and drones to the Russian military in violations of journalist ethics. He also claimed to have seen a satanic ritual in one of the occupied villages where right sector was stationed.
After listening to all of this, you may thought that all of the Russian Orthodox priests are actually cannibals and ready to follow anything what Patriarch Kirill is going to tell to them. But it's actually not true.
At the very beginning of the war, the priest of the Russian Orthodox Church wrote an open letter against the war, calling for ceasefire. Almost 300 people have signed the letter, but it is important to remember that there are over 20,000 of Orthodox priests serving only inside of Russia, and many more abroad. I would like to remind you that since the beginning of the war, in Russia there has been a new article created in the Criminal Code of Russia about discrediting the Russian army. According to this article, if a person in any way, whether it be picket on the street or comment under a post on Facebook, criticize or spreads information that discreditates Russian army, this person will firstly be fined, but if it happens again, this person can be imprisoned for up to 5 years. Just for saying something about the army. For wars, basically. And if there is also an action that causes, for example, damage to infrastructure, they can be imprisoned for up to 7 years. The first priest who was charged with administrative offense for discrediting the Russian army was Ian Burdin from the village of Kabaranovo, Kostroma Oblast. During the service in his church, Ian Burdin said that he prays for peace in Ukraine. Around 10 people were present during the ceremony, and one of them reported to the police. Ion was fined for 35,000 rubles, and later the Russian Orthodox Church banned him from serving in the church. He left Russia and joined the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. Many priests were forced to leave the Russian Orthodox Church because they could not serve God and pray for Patriarch Kirill and Putin at the same time, and some were even forced to leave Russia, fearing persecution from the state. Archpriest Fyodor Shumskih has requested political asylum in the United States after comparing the Russian Orthodox Church to the monks of Mount Athos, who during World War II supported Hitler and prayed for him. And of course, if the Russian Orthodox Church is being compared to the monks of Mount Athos, then Putin himself is being compared to Hitler.
Дорогие ребята, солдатики, вот вы, если видите, что церковь поддерживает эти вещи провоенные, это не означает, что это правильно. Вот, поэтому вы не должны это все слушать. Собственно говоря, через неделю-полторы, я не знаю, за эту проповедь или за другую, потому что я разные проповеди произносил и несколько раз служил в 22 году, в начале года. Но меня без объяснения причин уволили с должности воинского священника. Все. То есть за полтора, получается, месяца до начала войны я уже не был там войсковым священником.
Russian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchy started to deprive the holy dignity from those priests who spoke out against the war.
The Russian Orthodox Church has declared that pacifism is incompatible with the teachings of the Orthodox Church. During the church trial against Ian Burdin regarding the revocation of his right to serve, it was stated:
Pacifism throughout various periods of church history was present in heretical doctrines. Among Gnostics, Paulicians, Bogomils, Albigensians, Tolstoyans, revealing, like other utopian ideologies, a connection with ancient Kirilism.
Oppression of priests who are not agree with Kirill began as early as 2019. At that time, FSB, which is the ancestor of KGB, held talks with priests who signed open letters in support of political prisoners.
Right now, let's talk about Putin.
In March of 2000, Putin was elected for his first presidential term. In August same year, during Putin's visit to Pskovo-Pechorsky Monastery, Archimandrite Ian Kristyankin presented Putin with a copy of the Fyodorovskaya icon of the Mother of God, which is considered one of the relics of the last line of Russian monarchs, the Romanovs. It was this icon that blessed the first Romanov, Mikhail Fyodorovich, for his reign in 1613. Since then, this icon has become a symbol of blessing for the Russian throne. It is unknown whether it was Putin's initiative to be blessed with this very same icon or not, but the fact remains. He was blessed with the icon with which the reign of Roman dynasty began. On February 21st, 2022, 3 days before the invasion of Ukraine, Putin said, "Canonical orthodoxy in Ukraine needs protection." Let's see what this defender of canonical orthodoxy really believes in, if anything at all.
Putin used to take pictures with candles and icons all over the picture, but in real life, he doesn't even know how to cross correctly in orthodoxy. For example, from one of the pictures from 2018, when he was going by the Russian Orthodox Church into the ice hole on the Russian Christmas, he was going into this hole, and when you go there, you need to cross yourself. And when he went to this ice hole, he was a little bit stressed, shocked because of the temperature of the water, I guess, and he started to cross, and eventually he crossed like a Catholic. Because Catholics, they cross from to the left and then right. But in Orthodox Christianity, we cross firstly to the right and then to the left. And eventually, it brought many rumors. Is Putin even religious? Does he even believe in God? So let's find out.
Vladimir Putin spent Christmas alone, Inside the completely empty Annunciation Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin, the domestic church of the Russian Tsars, but in this church, the Tsars used to pray together with their families, servants and boyars. Only the president thought of turning the liturgy, which should be a common cause and a public worship, into a private service performed by order for one person. In 2018, on Orthodox Christmas, according to the Russian tradition, Putin plunged into an ice hole with cold water. However, there are rumors that Putin had the water heated for his bath, as journalists noticed a pipe leading to the ice hole. By the way, I myself took a dip in January 2022, and I even have a separate video about this tradition in the Russian Orthodox Church. However, no one heated up the water for me that time. Perhaps my social status does not yet provide such luxury for me. In April, Putin brought a copy of the 19th century icon to the front, while they demanded ammunition and equipment from him. There are rumors that Putin and Shoigu believe in shamanism. Former deputy of the Russian State Duma Maria Maksakova said,
Путину, тяготеющему к мистическому, магическому такому мышлению, такому, в принципе, мракобесу, обскурентному, ему страшно, когда он сталкивается со всем сверхъестественным. Он, во-первых, в это во все очень легко верит. И шаманические обряды, которые, судя по многочисленным сообщениям, они проводили на Горбатой горе с Шойгу, в одинаковых костюмчиках, вот эти ряженые, то там, говорят, даже сожгли несколько верблюдов для того, чтобы Путин не утратил остатки своего здоровья.
Journalists who worked in the Kremlin tell, it is forbidden to cut the tails, which means to intersect the president's trajectory even when he has already passed, or to step on his shadow, for example. One of the deputy prime ministers allegedly reschedules meetings based on advice from an astrologer. While it is possible that each of these statements may only be partially true or not true at all, the sheer amount of rumors with these characteristics in an environment of complete information secrecy can be considered evidence in and of itself. There are whispers in Russia about the superstitions and esoteric tendencies of the country's leadership. For example, the diameter of the main dome of the Cathedral of the Ministry of Defense is 22.43 meters because Hitler signed the Act of Capitulation of Germany at 22 o'clock 43 minutes. The height of the temple is 96 meters because the year 960 is considered the year of birth of the Saint Vladimir the Great. There are 48 icons of the iconostasis, the number of months of the war, including the Japanese one. All of this is variations of esoteric numerology that parasites on traditional Christian symbols. This may also explain Putin's fear of Shaman Alexander Gabushev from Yakutsk, who was going to drive Putin out of Kremlin but was arrested. In 2019, Shaman Gabushev organized a public protest in the form of a walking march from Yakutsk to Moscow. His march gathered about 100 people who walked along the federal highway to exorcise the demon Putin. According to him, to exorcise Putin, he will light a fire on Red Square right in front of the Kremlin wall. According to Yakut tradition, he was supposed to feed the fire with kumis and horsehair, beat a leather drum, and say a prayer after which Putin would come to his senses and calmly resign. And okay, these 100 people would just come to Moscow, organize a protest against Putin that would last for a couple of weeks, and then go home. However, Putin is terribly afraid of everything mystical, especially shamanism. Otherwise, why arrest Shaman Alexander Gabushev already near Ulan-Ude in Buryatia, when there were still many months and thousands of kilometers left to reach Moscow? Although Putin does not believe in Christianity, he has his own personal spiritual advisor, the closest priest to Putin, Metropolite Tikhon. Here's an interview with Metropolite Tikhon where he regrets about the collapse of the USSR.
Владыка, а неужели вы сожалеете о распаде Советского Союза?
Я и сожалею, и не сожалею одновременно.
Просто мне кажется, для вас...
Я любил эту страну. Я очень любил эту страну. В этой стране прошло мое детство. Я был пионером, да? Вот окромя всей коммунистической вот этой вот белиберды, но это была наша страна, это моя родная страна была. И при всех ее... Понятно, что невозможно любить и поддерживать хотя бы на йоту все эти лагеря, репрессии и так далее, и так далее, и так далее.
In addition to not believing in Christianity himself, Putin also thinks that he has the right to tell Christians who should be considered a saint in Orthodoxy and who should not. Vladimir Putin said this back in 2014.
А здесь знаменитые русские святые. Владимир Святой, Сергий Радонежский, Борис и Глеб.
Борис и Глеб, они, конечно, святые, понятно, но надо бороться за себя, за страну. Они как-то все это отдали.
Я с вами абсолютно согласен, Владимир Ильич.
Отдали без борьбы. Это
без борьбы
не может быть примером для нас.
Нет, не может быть.
The first Russian saints, Boris and Gleb, were canonized for refusing to participate in the civil war. But for Putin, probably the only saints are some pagan gods of war, not Boris and Gleb. Furthermore, Putin himself is trying to be elevated to the rank of a saint. In 2020, an icon of Putin was sold at the airport in St. Petersburg along with the icon of St. Nicholas for $1,300. In the newly built cathedral of the Ministry of Defense, in 2020, a fresco was made on the wall inside the cathedral featuring Putin and the Ministry of Defense Shoigu. So they really decided to replace the fresco of the saints, which is supposed to be in a holy place, with the fresco of Putin and his elites. What is this, if not elevating them to the status of saints? By the way, there was originally a panel dedicated to the victory of the USSR over Nazi Germany with Stalin in the same church. The absurdity of having the Mary, mother of Jesus, and Jesus above the communists who made God their enemy is simply astounding. This is actually the key problem with the Russian Orthodox Church. They do not separate themselves from the USSR. The same regime under which religion was almost destroyed, under which religion could only exist if it was under the state control. By the way, in 2021, I filmed a video on how Victory Day over Nazi Germany is celebrated in my hometown, and I saw this.
Why do Kazakhs have portrait of Stalin? Look at their swords. Why do they have Stalin portrait and Jesus flag? What the hell?
Regarding the Cathedral of the Armed Forces, which was built during Putin's presidency, inside the cathedral there is a fresco dedicated to the annexation of Crimea, on which Putin, Shoigu, and the governor of Crimea, Aksyonov, were depicted along with the words, "Crimea is ours." However, people were dissatisfied with this, and it was necessary to remove the portraits of officials and replace Crimea is ours with "We are together." In addition, on the territory of the Ministry of Defense Cathedral, Hitler's cap is kept as a symbol of victory. Also, the steps of the temple are made of metal tracks from German tanks of the Second World War. The absurdity of all this is overwhelming. Former members of the Communist Party, the most prominent athletes who do not believe in God, are building the cathedral that combines the celebration of military victory with Christianity. From all of this, we then get speeches by Solovyov about how Russia is opposing the satanism of the whole world.
Если вдуматься, то, что происходит, это сатанизм. Чисто бесы. По-другому не скажешь. А если мы имеем дело с слугами князя тьмы, если мы имеем дело с сатанинским началом, о каких переговорах и с кем мы говорим? Какие могут быть переговоры с сатаной? Они все время лгали. Это есть основа западной сатанинской цивилизации. Ложь. Мы последние защитники христианства.
Interesting fact, but the Wagner PMC under the leadership of Prigozhin also has its own chapel near Krasnodar, separate from the Ministry of Defense. It looks like a fortress to me, with its grey fences and architecture. Monuments of Wagner PMC mercenaries are located on the territory of the temple. Participants of the Wagner PMC who have nowhere else to be buried are buried near the chapel. Throughout his 23-year rule, Putin has mixed everything in Russia's self-identity: Christianity, militarism, communism, the cult of Stalin, paganism, and shamanism. If you really think that Russia is the last stronghold of Christianity, you are far from right. Just as the Maidan became a trigger for the Russian president, the creation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in 2018 and its autocephaly from Constantinople became a trigger for Patriarch Kirill. The trump card of Russian propaganda was that until 2019, Ukrainian churches were part of and under the control of the Moscow Patriarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church. This was one of the proofs of Russian propaganda that Ukraine was not an independent country. It also provided an excuse for protecting their church to justify the invasion, which Putin eventually used on February 21st, 3 days before the start of the invasion, by saying canonical orthodoxy in Ukraine needs protection.
The full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine only speeded up the division inside of Orthodox Church.
In the newly created Ukrainian Orthodox Church, they stopped commemorating Patriarch Kirill during the liturgy. Metropolitan Onufry, the head of the church, immediately publicly condemned the war. A bill was passed called on the impossibility of the activity in Ukraine of religious organizations affiliated with centers of influence in the Russian Federation. Russia constantly expresses its dissatisfaction with the transit of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church from the influence of the Moscow Patriarchate and granting the autocephaly to the Ukrainian Church by Constantinople. On January 14, 2023, when a Russian missile destroyed a residential building in Dnipro and the whole world watched in horror as the debris was cleared and the number of casualties increased, Russia's representative to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, hypocritically announced that the Russian side had requested a meeting of the UN Security Council in connection with the situation with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. After the start of the war of Russia against Ukraine, many churches of the Orthodox Church located outside of Russia and that were under control of Moscow Patriarchate began gradually trying to gain independence from Patriarch Kirill. At the end of May, the Lithuanian Eparchy requested the Moscow Patriarchate to grant the Lithuanian Eparchy the status of an autonomous church. In September 2022, previous Latvian President Egils Lavish submitted a bill to the Saima, which is basically a parliament, on providing the Latvian Church with full independence from the Moscow Patriarchate, that is, autocephaly. The Saima passed this law, although from the perspective of European legislation on freedom of conscience and religion, it looks like interference in the internal affairs of the denomination. From the point of view of canon law, the head of the state cannot grant autocephaly. In practice, this law primarily prevents Moscow from interfering in the process of approving and removing metropolitan, archbishops, and bishops. The Latvian Orthodox Church did not resist and recognized the new law, despite Moscow's outrage. The Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate has always been and remains a part of the Russian state. When Kirill wakes up, from the windows of the patriarchal residence in Danilov Monastery, only Moscow can be seen. The Patriarch fully identifies himself with Putin's political elites, the Russian regime, and cannot imagine the future of the Russian Orthodox Church other than the reconstruction of the Soviet Church within its former borders, and in the decor of Holy Russia.